Good morning and welcome to the GWAC Architecture Council Symposium here at RE+. We're very excited and happy to have you here today. The title of the symposium is Grid Transformation, Building the Energy Future. All right, get my mouse set up there. I am Ron Bernstein. I'm the current chair of the council. And we'll be talking a little bit about the council today. You'll hear quite a bit about who we are and what we do. I'm also the CEO and principal engineer at RBCG Consulting. I'm in the buildings market and building to grid market, so that's how I fit into the picture. A little bit about GWAC, in case you're not familiar with GWAC. I'm just going to read this. The GridWise Architecture Council, GWAC, is a team of industry leaders who are shaping the guiding principles or architecture of a highly intelligent and interactive electric system, one ripe with decision-making, information exchange, and market-based opportunities. This architecture will provide guidelines for interaction between participants and interoperability between technologies and systems. That's our grand vision of kind of who we are and what we do. We are a sponsored or supported effort by the U.S. Department of Energy, and we're very pleased to welcome our U.S. DoD sponsor in the room today. Wherever he is, there he is. He'll be talking with us shortly. So a little bit about the council. This is our 20th anniversary, and this morning, for all the council members, got their 20th anniversary pins this morning and yesterday, or day before yesterday. So we've been at this 20 years now. Started in 2004, and we're going to hear from some of our emeritus members and past administrators a little bit about the history and kind of the foundation of where GWAC has come from. So I'm going to unveil for the second time. If you were at the tutorial, you may have seen this, but for those who weren't at the tutorial on Monday, the folks at P&L put together a really nice video, or 3 videos that I then compiled into one, which gives you really a good background on what we do, who we are, and why we're doing what we're doing. So without further ado, let's hope this works.
Who is building the grid of the future? Well, there's no single organization. The task is just too big. But the GridWise Architecture Council is shaping the guiding principles or architecture of a highly intelligent and interactive electric system. The Council offers concepts and guidance to stakeholders who are part of the evolution of the power grid. Convened in 2004 by the Department of Energy, the GWAC has already had a big impact on interoperability standards and transactive energy concepts. The Council envisions the societal benefits of a decarbonized, decentralized, and democratized electricity system that will supply the energy needs of today and for future generations. The power grid is evolving. New technologies generate, control, and use electricity. And coordinating these distributed, sometimes customer-owned, assets is complex. The GridWise Architecture Council guides this evolution and promotes interoperability among the many entities that interact with the nation's electrical power system. The 13 rotating council members have a variety of backgrounds within the electrical system. They are thought leaders in utilities, buildings, policy, engineering, software, consumer advocacy, and more. The Council bridges these communities with their individual perspectives to create an inclusive vision for the future grid. This guidance facilitates the interoperation of the systems, devices, and institutions that encompass the nation's electric system. To prepare for the grid of the future, the GridWise Architecture Council defines, clarifies, and recommends architectural principles and concepts, and provides guidelines, position statements, and checklists for decision makers. Workshops and meetings identify challenges and solutions and provide feedback to the Council. The Council seeks input from various sectors and stakeholders to create a consensus vision for the future grid. If you're interested in helping shape the vision for a decarbonized, decentralized, and democratized electricity system, we'd like to connect with you. Get started by joining us for GWAC monthly meetings, which are listed on our website.
All right, there we go. Yay! Round of applause for our new video. Very exciting to have a new video going there. So a little bit more about GWAC. So when the Architecture Council was founded, there was an initial vision and mission, and then we've just recently revamped that. After our 20 years, we took on a slightly different model for our vision. The grid-wise architecture supports a vision of a decarbonized, decentralized, and democratized electricity system to ensure the energy needs of today and that of future generations. So we're now focusing on the, kind of where we're going in the future, more than just the architecture today, but the architecture of the future. So we've got some mission. You're going to hear a lot about that from different people today. I just want to leave you with the structure of GWAC. As the video said, we're 13 council members. Council members in the room, you all raise your hand. All right, there's some of the council members in the room today. And they rotate annually. We have different council members roll on and roll off over periods of time. If you'd like to know more about that, there's the mailing list, the website, and our YouTube videos. We have a whole collection of guest speakers over the last few years that we have up on YouTube now that you can hear presentations from industry experts. So there's our council. I won't introduce them all. You'll be hearing or seeing most of them through the course of the 2 days, but there's our council. I will point out Jamie. If you have any problems, you see Jamie over here, or Susie in the back of the room from PNNL. They're our staff, our administrator, and coordinator. So if there's any issues, please see them. All right, so the symposium. We have quite a bit of material. We have a lot of speakers. Over the course of the 2 days, we have 11 sessions with close to 40 speakers. So you've got a handout here if you want to know who's speaking where. There's handouts kind of sprinkled around the room. You can grab that. We are, in a structure, we're going to be in this room as the main room, and the room next door is our breakout room. So if you see here, the topics in blue are in this room, and the ones that are red or light orange there are going to be in the other room. So starting this afternoon with the first panel session, that'll be in the separate room, and we'll have 2 concurrent sessions going on. Right? We'll take some breaks in the middle. We'll have a lunch break, and I do want to mention that the panel sessions are followed by a workshop where we can receive feedback from you so that we can learn more about what you're interested in. And that's an important part of what this workshop or the symposium is about, is valuing your input, that's our outcome, and provide us direction. And it provides us an opportunity to engage with various different stakeholders, and more for us to listen as well as engage with the speakers that we brought in to guide the council in our work efforts. All sessions in this room, as I said, are being recorded. The other room, we don't have that capability, and we'll make those available on our website. There's going to be a moderator for each session, so there's 11 moderators. They'll all be available in case there's any tech issues, and we've got tech support here as well. So lunch is on your own. There's various places nearby. On the first floor, there's a food court, but we will start promptly on the afternoon session. We do want to provide time for networking and engagement, so there's plenty of time for that built in. And the workshops, we are asking that we get some feedback and have a report out, so don't be shy and share with us your input on that. So I also want to have a big thank you, express a big thank you to all the volunteers. All of the council members are volunteers, so we're doing this out of our giving back to the industry. I also want to thank our PNNL staff, our sponsor from the Department of Energy, and also to the RE Plus staff for helping create this event. So I hope you enjoy this symposium. So with that, I'm going to bring up Steve Whittegren, who is our illustrious initial administrator of the council going back 20 years ago. Steve has very graciously agreed to come out of retirement for today, or close to it, and share some thoughts and insights based upon the history over 20 years of working with the council. Please welcome Steve Whittegren.
Thank you, Ryan. And if you use the word to say hello to anybody and use Ron, you're probably right. In this group of the council, there's lots of Rons. I am fully retired, so and I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak with everybody today about this. Being retired, I'm able to read the paper a lot more. And one of my favorite things is the comics, and most recently, Pooch Cafe has been one of my favorite comics to look at here. This one kind of summarizes a little bit what we do at the council. So Pancho is the little dog who's trying to figure out, or is being told the impressive owners or masters of his friends, and he's trying to figure out, okay, I don't really know what my master does, but I think it's pretty cool. And Chaz, who is his master at the end, says, I implement scalable conceptualize, which I thought was really important, and implement scalable ecosystem architecture that accommodates diverse modalities. And when I read that on Labor Day, I thought, yeah, that's the Architecture Council. I had something to share with you guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what you already saw in the video, but I'll go maybe a little bit more into some foundational aspects of how the council was formed in terms of a context for the motivation for the work that they continue to do here. So we'll talk about a little bit about the purpose and mission and key accomplishments, and then upcoming work or things that will, I imagine, the council will still be involved with going forward. So I want you to imagine, I came to the laboratory, P&L is a part of the Department of Energy's laboratory system. So I came from industry after about 25 years working with utilities, and then in a startup company and delivering control centers. And I came to the laboratory in 2001, and they started something called the Energy Systems Transformation Initiative. And this was done with money that the government gives out to the laboratories to be able to think of new concepts and basically have a little bit of a sandbox to bring out ideas and everything. So through that work in the first couple of years there, we looked at and posed the question, what would we do and how would we design the electric system if we were going to start whole cloth from scratch today? And we looked at the trends that were occurring, and these trends, I think maybe climate change is a little bit stronger now, but it was even in 2001 a primary driver going forward, and the whole decarbonization was definitely in our future. The fact that we were going to have, with decarbonization, greater use of electrification, and that so we would have more loads involved, and we would have things like crypto mining and AI. Those are more recent things that are happening, right? That are taxing the amount of energy that we're producing and consuming electrically. And the other big thing was DER. So distributed energy resources were coming on the scene. There were definitely things like gas-fired backup units and things like that, but also photovoltaics and wind were really becoming very prominent in the discussions, at least, and in trials and pilots and various things like that. And the other thing is we work very big in the buildings community with controllable load. And in industrial systems have been doing this for a long time, being able to be flexible about their use and be able to save money in so doing. So taking those trends and coupling them with the revolution that occurred basically with the internet, and which happens because of the decreased costs and processing power and intelligence that way, the greater communications capability and its pervasiveness to connect all things together, and the whole architecture of the internet of being more distributed and scalable because of that, and resilient because of that. So how could we think of, there's a lot of distributed things that already occur in the electric system traditionally. However, it also has a very strong centralized bias to how decisions are made as well. And restructuring started separating those things, but we saw this as a trend that would be something that actually went down all the way to all the loads and all the things that interconnect with the electric system. So I was given the assignment for architecture and standards of this little group that we had at the lab. And they wanted me to look at, create the standards so that we could connect our market-based control systems, and everything's going to start to work together. And I thought that was, quite an ask for somebody to do, and particularly because now when you think of all the other stuff that we said we're going to do this all from scratch, well, you really can't do that from scratch. You've got a whole bunch of stuff that's already in the field. That's been changing out. We have stuff from the beginning of electricity, probably, that's still running in New York, and as well as all the new stuff that's coming in. So you have to think architecturally of something that's going to be able to span all these ages and going to be able to evolve over time. And the other thing is there are 4 words that really define any utility industry executive, and that's to keep the lights on. You need high availability. You want to do it safely. Obviously, that's the other word maybe that they need to be in there. But all of this change that is going to occur needs to occur while the system continues to run. So I said, there's nobody that's going to listen to me. I thought I had ideas. I thought, if I were king, this is how I might be able to do it. But nobody's going to listen to me. I needed an amplifier, a megaphone, and to also kind of get rid of my own hubris that I didn't have all the answers, and that the answers needed to reside with a lot of other people to be able to contribute to that. And in that contribution, you would create a larger community with which this architecture or these new approaches could be able to actually be implemented and come to realization. So one of the key things, as pointed out in the video and all, and in Ron's statements, is this broad base of everybody that's involved with electricity, right? So we're highly leaning towards the information technology aspects. Those are the large changes that have changed in all of industry and the economy. But we have all the implementation areas, the electric grid itself, the loads, the commercial buildings and residential buildings, the whole industrial systems, and then we have the things that kind of tend to glue things together, like the markets, the electricity markets and other markets that are involved with how to build things, as well as the policy people, those that are involved in government and in industry, the businesses themselves that basically form how work gets done. So being that this was a lot influenced by what happened in the internet, I looked to the IETF. And I was aware of the architecture board within the IETF, and I started reading more of their things and what did they do. I found out there were 13 people that were members of the IETF, and it's this advisory board. I think they changed it to architecture board, but originally it was called the advisory board to the Internet Engineering Task Force, and they were represented by all the big companies. You have like Cisco and now Apple and Microsoft, and those guys sit on the IETF, and they kind of oversee what's going on standards-wise and things like that to make sure that the integrity of the architecture of the internet is maintained. So I thought of that, and I worked with a really sharp person who had joined the lab recently. Her name was Mia Bousquet at the time, which is now Mia Paget. And she and I kind of came up with this structure for the Architecture Council. And the idea was that they would be this conceptualization of structures and organization and the principles of interaction, because this is really a systems of systems type of problem, right? You have components that need to work together. It's not one monolithic type of thing. It's something that's an organism that's growing with stuff coming in and out all the time. And it has, the council quickly focused on interoperability, even though we all agreed architecture was the right word at the time for the name. But interoperability and architecture go hand in hand in my mind. And the first things that you think about interoperability-wise tend to be technical. systems, and those are the standards and things like in Wi-Fi. Why does Wi-Fi work and Ethernet work, and how do we get messages passed around within the system? But then within those messages, you have information. You don't get things to work unless people actually speak the same language and understand what you're trying to convey as you exchange messages. And then those things work within a set of business processes, legal rules, all sorts of policy things that have to be put in place in the communities to support them. And if you're able to really define these interfaces and be precise about them through all of these concerns, then you have a marketplace or an ecosystem of products and systems. You have price points there. They have better fitting for the different types of needs that are done through this very complex organism. You have better security management, and all of that leads to reduced costs in these many different areas. So the council embraced interoperability in one of their in their early meeting, actually, I think their first meeting, and we had a phone conference. They still had phones at the time, and we did that virtually in the first meeting. And then we met in Colorado, and we tried to elect a chairman, and that didn't really work out at the time, so we put that on hold for a little bit. But we quickly did settle on a chairman. The first chairman was Rick Drummond, and Rick had this idea. They all agreed. These are and continue to be people that have, great influence, respect, and outreach into industry, and that if this was going to be successful, it needed to touch a lot of people. So Rick focused on that a lot, and he said, what are we going to do to make a splash with the Architecture Council going forward? And I had written some things on terms of reference. We talked about some principles and things like that. And we started to work with that to develop what we called the statements of principles that were part of an interoperability constitution. And we held a constitutional convention in Philadelphia, much like where the debate occurred last night, but it wasn't there. But it was in Philadelphia. And this was the start of, I think, a real good engagement with the community. And we got more and more people involved through doing this. That led to growing that community and getting more people involved with the council. We started to look at how to talk about interoperability. It was hard to pronounce almost, right? So people were sort of struggling with, what are you guys really up to? And I think that continues today, right? Like Pancho snoring in the first cartoon. But we worked on this concepts of interoperability and the fact that you needed to have all of these things aligned to actually interoperate together. And so we created a context we call the context setting framework. Many council members contributed to that, and we also had people from who weren't on the council who were very instrumental in this. And we held another meeting, an outreach workshop, where we floated a draft of these concepts and then talked about them and refined them, and eventually came up with the kind of the final version of the interoperability context setting framework. And that probably, I think there's a version 1.1 or something of that. And with this tool, actually, it's come in handy because it's also a place where you can characterize where are we today with existing standards, and how do you compare existing standards, and what's missing from that. And what you see missing, basically that technical level, right, that's been solved for many, many decades now. It continues to evolve, but we don't really worry about that so much. We've worried a lot about the information level. We continue to do that. But what gets very much not touched is the business level and that sort of that upper level of the stack. And so a lot of what the council did, thanks to their work and their insights, was to reach out into those business communities and with regulators and all policymakers to be able to help start shape that. We got some funding, or we got some recognition, let me say, through some legislation that was passed in Congress in 2007 called the EASA Act, which was the Energy Infrastructure and Security Act, I believe. And it was unfunded at the time, but it did put smart grid on the map, and that the federal government was interested, that this was an important thing. The federal government was interested in this. And NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, was given the role of looking at the standards and interoperability problems for the electric grid going forward. So NIST was not given any funds, so they had to sort of scrape up some things within their organization. And we managed to get with them in the early days that were sort of stumbling around wondering what to do in this area, and the council became a very influential partner with them. We held a meeting. By that time, the council had moved on to something called Grid Interop, which was discussion of interoperability issues and conferences with industry and various representatives, and NIST got involved in that in 2007 as well. They started attending those meetings, and by 2009, that Grid Interop they stood up a group called the SGIP, which is a Smart Grid Interoperability Panel. And we have some people in the audience who are involved in the formation of all of that. And if you look at this picture here, one of our presenters coming up here is Chris Irwin. He's actually in the picture. And then there's this little known guy, Vincent Cerf, who was on the governing board of that group as well. So beyond that, then my tenure, I actually became plenary chair of the SGIP, which then rolled into SEPA, merged with SEPA, and that's how we're a part of a good sort of history lesson here on how the GWAC got involved with this conference. So the transactive energy framework, transactive energy is a term that we coined at the laboratory for this market-based controls framework, distributed decision-making type of thing. The council took that on as a next phase of its work after I departed as administrator, and there's a bunch of literature on concepts, organizational structures, and principles for that. And then their most recent area has been in grid architecture, and we had a GWAC member who became a employee of the laboratory, did a lot of work in setting up some foundational work in grid architecture and being able to better explain it and to create tools for applying it to designs for utilities and for others, working with utilities for these sorts of robust, resilient systems with interoperable components. So I'm going to wrap up here. I hope I'm not too bad on time, Mr. Bernstein. A little bit more of maybe what was already in the video, but what you've seen, hopefully through some of the accomplishments, is that this outreach that the council has done from its very beginning is part of its DNA, and that is to educate community, continue that education on grid architecture and interoperability, wake people up, keep them from snoring, make it interesting as much as you can, but underscore that importance. Being able to convene stakeholders to look at these issues and have those stakeholders represent all the broad section of the things that electricity touches, which is pretty much everything, and to provide the leadership through sponsoring events such as we have here at the RE Plus in this symposium. I think Ron brought up a very key point for the council to continue to listen. If you look at the work products, every work product has input that came from people that were outside of the Architecture Council. And I think it's very important for that to happen. I mean, there's some just really great ideas, and there are good people with good ideas that are out there, and they need to be brought in and pulled into these and conceptualized and be able to market that to the broader audience. Through this socialization, trying to find that common ground, having others have input into it creates that common ground in my mind. Advocate for those best ideas, look for the things that are going to work from an ecosystem perspective in standards, the guidelines like the checklists, business policy frameworks, and that sort of thing. And I think this last point was when we started with the council, my idea was that whatever we work on, let's not just like a flash in the pan, but let's try to get to the base things that are really enduring and be able to move this forward. And so creating those work products that will have input, good ideas, and things that will last through time are important. And with that, I thank you. Have a wonderful symposium. I'm happy to be here and join in. Thanks, folks.
And this is David Corporal, Chair, Council, and current member. Hold on, Steve, before you get to run away. So, I am the chair of this session, and when you set up a session like this, you call your friends. So, the nice thing that I have for being on the council for as long as I have, not only do I have colleagues, and I learned a lot professionally from Mr. Wintergren, but I also get to call Steve a friend. And from that, it also means I know a lot about craft beer that I did not know before I joined the council. I know a lot about beverages from Scotland that are distilled, thanks to Steve. So,
well, thanks to your Gunther, probably knows that.
Well, you hope.
But we both.
So greatly appreciate having friends together. Steve, thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. Thank you.
So our next speaker is Chris Irwin, but before I bring Mr. Irwin up on the stage, I need to thank our chair, Ron Bernstein. I've done a number of these conferences as chair emeritus. It's always a challenge. Ron, myself, and the other members of the council don't know when you sleep to get everything done. But when you go back after the sessions and all the sessions we're going to do today, and you see the videos posted on the website, that's Ron's volunteer work. Putting all of this together is Ron volunteering his time away from his family and from his clients to be able to get this stuff done. So Ron, thank you from the council's perspective. Appreciate it. I can't thank you enough for taking this over. I think I did 4 of these. I like being able to see. So thank you. So Chris, if you'd like to come up. So saw Chris Irwin in the SGIP photo sitting on the front row.
A lot more hair.
Lot more hair. I had a lot more hair then too, because I eventually ended up being chair of SGIP. Here McCaffrey got me involved with PMO. Again, call friends. So Chris is a friend. I've worked with Chris now on the Architecture Council and SGIP since 2010. So I've learned a lot from Chris's presentations. I think the first one I heard was Friends in Low Places.
Garth Brooks theme.
Got Garth Brooks themes for every slide. I still use one of your slides and one of a Chris idiom in my presentations about transactive energy. I had a picture of an Oreo, because do things at the bulk markets apply to distribution? Try to make an Oreo at home that looks like what you get out of the factory. That analogy plays well. It explains the concepts. So Chris, I turn it over to you, and I put you in good hands, sir.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll see if I can do slide advancing and things like that. So, welcome. We have 36 acres of intelligent people downstairs, just waiting to change the world. But you walk through the first 2, 3, 4 acres of vendors and presenters, and you start to wonder, what the heck am I supposed to do? What is the intelligent thing to do? You can't even linearly walk this show floor, much less understand the opportunities that are in front of you. So I just wanted to just take a couple of minutes and put this question to you. What is a grid-wise person to do when you come to these events? And I want you to take the opportunity, if you can, when we get to these networking breaks, if you have a question that's been burning in your mind or that you've never been happy with the answer you've received so far, come up to a GridWise Architecture Council member, come up to Steve, David, Aaron, Ron, and ask them your question. I think that you'll see that we have attempted, through the council and through the people who've been selected to be council members, to offer a new perspective, a different perspective on the problems that you confront. And so I wanted to talk about that a little bit, because what is a GridWise person to do for your profession and at the show, and how are you going to move forward, be effective, be powerful in the actions that you have today. So to a certain extent, the reason that we have the symposium is to help you think about problems in a different way. And I think that's going to be an interesting and operative thing here. I want to talk about, Steve, you did a great build-up of things here and the history of it. And you really focused on the importance of the two critical tools that we've applied to this perspective on the grid. And that is architecture and interoperability. We didn't stick with the first view of interoperability that we originated, and we didn't stick with the first definition of architecture that we originated. Just like technology and telescopes evolve over time, is you don't stick with the old one. You keep innovating and bringing up the next version of interoperability that helps things work better, the next version of architecture. And so the council, while continuing to use these perspectives, these tools of interoperability and architecture, these are not the wooden rulers and the protractors of the original architect's arsenal. And so that's the start of what we're going to move here. I wanted to sort of take a movement into these two things through something that is occupying an insane amount of time for me in these days, which is transportation electrification. And I wrote myself a note so that I could be really smart about taking a look here. So we say that grid architecture is a way of understanding the system, of identifying the structural relationships between parties and entities and technologies, and giving you a way to look at the world, a way to rearrange those boxes and make something better out of them. So in this particular realm, what we've done is we've taken the question of transportation electrification. Transportation is not, there are not a lot of electric vehicles today. So can you say that our transportation system is not dependent on the grid? And the answer would be no. It is incredibly dependent on the electric system. And so one thing that we've done just very recently is to take the tools of grid architecture and apply them to the petroleum-fueled infrastructure that it underlies gasoline vehicles today. What is the state of interdependence between gasoline infrastructure and the electricity system today, so that we start to have a good idea of where our internal combustion engine customers coming from? How much reliability do they have in their vehicles, in their fueling infrastructure? How dependent are they today on electricity? Because it's not zero. And as everybody knows, when the power goes out, you can't charge your electric vehicle at home. But, of course, when the power goes out, you can't pump gas either. So you're very much in the same boat in those kinds of arrangements. But we need a systematic way of understanding those problems. So in this analysis performed by PNNL, we did a structural analysis of what is the state of interdependencies between that fossil fueling infrastructure, between the way we move, store, and deliver finished gasoline to an end customer, to get that structural understanding of where are we coming from. Because our goal in the electric sector is to improve the customer experience. We want the customer to feel that their electric vehicle is fueled more reliably, more conveniently, and in all ways better than that fossil fueling experience. But we need to understand that in a quantitative sense before we can prove to people that we're offering them a better future. I'm going to give you 30 seconds to go. No, I am not. But what I'm trying to convey in this kind of arrangement is that through the tools of architecture, we have ways of viewing disparate systems and getting to the essence of them. We can toggle between how would we consider reliability and resilience of an electricity-fueled infrastructure, all the way from the bulk generation system down to the charging of a specific vehicle. And how can we explain to gasoline vehicle owners and the people who, of course, maintain all of those infrastructures, of why we're presenting a more compelling future, a more interesting future. One thing that I wanted to lay out here is that fossil fuel energy has an incredible amount of storage. That is an incredible power, which the grid has not had, but we're catching up very fast. The other thing that fossil fueled infrastructure does not have is that it does not have the ability to use gasoline in the home. I've seen some interesting commercials about gasoline-powered appliances in the kitchen, and it doesn't turn out well unless you've got a really big heat hood in the place. But when you electrify transportation, is that you create a resource that originates where you are, and you can convert the power in your vehicle into espresso, if you wish. And it seems kind of trivial, but it's actually quite powerful, because our goal in the electric system is to produce affordable, reliable, and resilient energy. So one thing that we've done, that I've commissioned with the National Renewable Energy Lab to do, is as we have this structural understanding of the system, and as we start to move that into the electric vehicle position and the designs here, is what's not possible here, let's see here, get my fossil fuel up, is that you cannot push energy back up from the vehicle, but you can with electric vehicles. And so the first thing that we're trying to understand, now that we have the architecture of the system, is what is the unit level resilience that a customer at a home with an electric vehicle can create for themselves? Because now with a vehicle to home capability, or just running some of the outlets out of the back of your F-150, is that you have your own resilience. You have a way to handle a system that you could not during a regular power outage. So once we start to understand that unit level resilience, which so far is proving out that some houses can go for days without energy and still sustain their critical functions. That's important because it helps us understand our electricity customers in a new way. They are more capable than they used to be. But the challenge for us at the Gridwise Architecture Council, the challenge for you, is how can we take the power of our network, the power of our electrical grid, and network that resilience into something valuable for the community and for society. Because once that unit level resilience exists, it's our job to think about how it could be networked into the future. So that's the first value that I want to talk about with the Gridwise Architecture Council, is we apply a unique perspective, a perspective that can be very quantitative in nature, to difficult, complex, overwhelming problems. The other challenge that we have here that GWAC continually applies to problems is one of interoperability. And again, despite the fact that I'm standing on top of several terawatts of solar and renewable things below us, is that I still pivot to the vehicle grid integration issues, is how do we tap into the aggregate storage resting on tires in our system? Because right now, today, there is more rolling storage in the United States than there is stationary storage for the electric grid. And as we move that revolution forward, there will forever and always be more rolling storage than stationary storage on the grid, because it is produced by accident. It is not produced on purpose for the grid. So how can we take advantage of that? The energy exists, that's fantastic. The relations between the entities exist, that's also wonderful. But without the ability to exchange information, without the ability to coordinate in advance, we will remain blind to these incredible opportunities that we have. And that's where systematic studies of interoperability come in. How can we get the data and the information that's locked in our multi-sector systems and make it work together? So I just wanted to give those opportunities. Please, during a networking break, bring your most challenging questions to the council members. Don't let us talk amongst ourselves. Just elbow your way in and have that conversation. And I hope you have an excellent session today.
Help me off stage, David. I'm coming. So they got a camera. Oh. Okay. I've got one of these from 2010. How many of that is they had cameras in 2010? No. So our final speaker today is one of the many variants of Ron that are part of the GWAC Architecture Council. So when I asked Dr. Schneider to come up and close out our session, I told him, your job is to go through and lay out what the council's doing in the future, align with what Mr. Irwin has done, and sort of tee up the rest of the sessions and how it applies to the council. Again, sometimes friends ask hard questions. So thank you, Aaron.
Thank you. I feel like I should just use Chris's slides, but and go into them in excruciating detail. You've heard it a few times, starting with Steve and with Chris and with Ron. We're a group of 13 individuals. We have varied perspectives, and that's kind of the strength of the council. We can debate things. We can look at things, kind of use the analogy looking at the elephant. We all see the elephant a different way, but we're all describing the elephant. We can work together. And what the council is doing today is looking at that future we're all talking about. We want electrified transportation. We want decarbonization. We want a better environment. We've looked at, in recent work, which is also very recently published, is where are we going? And who has talked about where we're going and how they talked about where they're going. And in the report that we put together, we looked at what people said that were the same, what people said was different, and we do a good job of finding the gaps and then identifying solutions for the gaps. So you heard initially there was a problem with interoperability, and the council said, well, let's address interoperability. And the concept, the word we use, GWAC stack, still used today, still valid in projects that are used today, 20 years later. Like, in fact, in the slides maybe that some of us built yesterday for a client, we still use that. You still use that in your projects. The concept of transacting energy, exchanging it in a different way is still used. It was new. The way we talk about it is new. Grid architecture, applying, used to talk about enterprise architecture from the IT perspective. Now we're using grid architecture. So we do work to address these gaps, to address these challenges. And if you look at the bottom, you see the GWAC stack, you see the architecture techniques, the work we've done and the work that's been applied from the labs. you see one view of this conceptual model of the grid, which was used to organize the conversation around how can we address these issues. So we still do that. And what we're looking to do now is examine that future. Where do we want to go? How do we analyze where do we want to go? And how do we define the path to get there? One of the things we assert is it's time to build some roadmaps. There's a couple of different ways to think about roadmaps. I like to use the analogy, if you're planning a vacation, you think about where you're going. Well, what are you going to do when you get there? You don't worry about where you are. Like, I want to go to the beach. What am I going to do at the beach? That determines how I'm going to load the car and what clothes I'm going to pack. Maybe the path's a little different. Maybe the bridge is out. Maybe there's traffic. But I can get to the beach with that vision in mind. If we continue to increment, things in a small fashion, or iterate in a small fashion, we can find a mismatch. I joke with my kids, if I use Google Maps, if you always take the path that's 2 minutes longer, will you ever get there? Because it's always telling you, let's use this path. It's just 2 minutes longer. And then pick that. And you do that 3 times and they start getting mad. They're like, where are we driving? So you got to be concerned about doing that kind of selection every time. And we say power, takes the path of least resistance. Travel can sort of take the path of least resistance. Sometimes it's the longer time. So what we're looking to do now is build that, think about where the future is, and we'll present the concepts. You've already seen them, and you're seeing them here in text, the present, forward, and future back. And then, as a group, interacting with you in the industry, developing those kinds of roadmaps that have that long-lasting value that Steve mentioned. Again, the GWAC stack, one of the first things they came up with, the interoperability framework, still relevant, still useful. What is that impactful thing we can do? Thanks to some work by other folks, we have this concept of present, forward, and future back perspectives. I didn't realize there was animation because I borrowed the slide from someone else. I'll put it all here. We are where we are today. We can't change where that position is. We can imagine where we want to go, and we can change the direction we take. So if we think about where we are, okay, the past is the past, I'm right here. Can't change that, but I can change where I'm headed. I can head toward Stewart, I can head toward the door, I can head toward the coffee. Each one of those has a different decision in mind. If I choose to head towards Stewart and then pick up coffee, is that the best path? Maybe, but that's okay. But can I think about what my ultimate goal was getting coffee? Do I need to go out the door or through my friend Stewart? So think about that future and work your way back to the things you need to do to get there. Sort of goal-oriented. If I think I want to be an engineer, what do I need to do to become an engineer? If I want to be an architect, if I want to be a musician, if I want to do whatever I want to do, that's the goal. Now what do I need to do from where I am today? I can't change where I am today. So that's what we're looking at. And you'll see in the sessions we have this conversation from these different perspectives. And we're really hoping, and we like this interaction with the industry, to bring in that extra input, like Chris said. Find a council member, ask the question. Bring your input to the table. Review our drafts. Come to these workshops. We call them workshops. We're not just going to talk to you. We're going to work with you. So this symposium, today and tomorrow, these are the topics in alphabetical order. I didn't want to try to put them in the program order, but these are the different things we're looking at. And you'll find a place for you in the conversation from your perspective, but you'll find something also that challenges your perspective. So Chris laid out a good challenge about mirroring what we're doing with transportation with electricity versus transportation with fossil fuels, and the fact that that's more rolling storage, or more storage on the road than there is at sitting still, unless they're all parked. So, but that's a different way to think about transportation. We don't think of it as mobile storage. That makes us think it's different, but there's one way it's the same, and that's when it's plugged in. It's still got an inverter there. We still need to connect to the grid. There's a connection point. So these are the different perspectives you're going to see today and tomorrow. Coordination dynamics, customer perspective, consumer perspective, there's different terms. What's going on at the grid edge? What are some global perspectives of the work we're doing, both in the developing world and then what we call the developed world? Grid edge electrification, grid transformation. Of course, I'm reading for you. I'm sure you can all read. information and communication, new industry structures, pathways to decentralization, and regulatory and policy. Again, alphabetical order, not intended to create, all of these are important. No one's more important than the other. And why those perspectives are important, to leave you with the final message is, if we think that the green arrow is our future, it's been pointed out by many that if we follow the blue path, we'll get to a certain point and you'll kind of hit your ceiling. If we start from where we are today, that's the blue path and the blue arrow, we're going to get there. But where we really might need to be at some point to get to green is where the red arrow is. And you'll notice there's a gap. There's always a gap from where you are to where you want to go. And you're going to pick a path that may get you there or not, and how well can you address that gap and move along. So what we like to do in the council is think about that problem. How do we solve that problem? If blue is our limit from where we are today, but we want to be at green, how can we come together and get us to green, knowing that our starting point is going to change? And it's not going to be even identifiable. So, personal story, you start in engineering at a school, and at some point you see the thing on the wall that says, go to France, get paid. Oh, get paid, that sounds great, go to France. Well, I don't know about that. I'll do it anyway. But that's not the path I was choosing. That was not my path. But that path was the gap. And then the green was, I really just want to be an engineer and play music. So I was doing things that got me to blue, and then I had to jump the gap to get to green. So now I got to achieve my goals, but I had to make a big change in the middle. I could speak to you in French now. That was not on my path. And trust me, you don't want me to do that. I could do my whole session in French, and you'll be sitting there going, what just happened? So think about that. Where you are today, imagine your future, you might have to make a big change and be willing to make that change. And the council is good at bringing together our diverse perspectives to do that. And in the things you've heard us talk about, interoperability, transactive energy, grid architecture, tools to define how to do that we can leverage as a community to do that. And that's all of my message. That's what we're doing here today. So we want you to work with us. We're not here to talk to you. We're here to work with you. Thank you.
All right, so it looks like we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is good because I get to kind of share a little bit of my experience with the council. I was a buildings integrator for about 15 years, and I came to PMNL about 6 years ago, and I started working on these grid modernization lab consortium projects with Steve. And immediately I realized that I'd been missing a piece of all the work that I'd been doing, and that's this abstract vision of where we really need to go. So I do want to just point out that I didn't work with council for quite a long time, but I've been reading their work and being influenced by it in my work. So I appreciate Steve for bringing me into that world, and it's a great privilege and honor to work with the brilliant minds that we have working on the council and hear all these different perspectives. And I want to emphasize something that Aaron mentioned, is that these are stakeholder groups, right? These are folks that represent buildings, they represent innovations in microgrid technologies and transactive energy principles. The spaces that these folks work in brings that diverse perspective and allows us to make smarter decisions when we're architecting the grid of the future. It's also my honor and privilege to be able to introduce our keynote speaker for today. I want to make sure I get this right because there's quite a bit of history with this gentleman. He's a nationally recognized expert in clean energy policy and programs. He's got 30 years of experience in the industry. He worked for a little utility we all know as Southern California Edison for over 23 years. And he brings a unique perspective to the Department of Energy Office of Electricity with that experience and also his vision for transformation. So I do want to welcome...
Force you to cut it short.
I do want to welcome Gene Rodriguez, the Assistant Secretary for Electricity of DOE's Office of Electricity. Welcome, Gene.
It's always so painful to have folks have to listen to the introduction to me that my mother writes. I was a Boy Scout too, that you left that part out. I want to say that I'm tremendously honored to be here today, and not for the reasons you might think. I'm honored to be here today because everything you heard from the speakers before me is the real reason that the GridWise Architecture Council exists. We heard the words used, vision, and we just saw translating vision into roadmaps. That's where we are today. But I want to say, from my role as the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Electricity, I want to say that the most important stuff happening in this building are the conversations that are going to take place here today. And at the risk of making, you're all in Southern California now, so let's Hollywood it up a little bit. Let's make this a little bit of a disaster movie intro, from which you will be the heroes to rescue us. And I just want to note something that I think most folks don't get. No, sorry, that I know most folks don't get. The reliability of the electricity system that this country's had, that is the envy of the world. Mark, I'm telling you, it's the envy of the world. You guys are second place to us. That is the envy of the world is taken for granted in ways that are truly dangerous. Is misunderstood in ways that are not just dangerous, but detrimental to the future. Is celebrated in very quiet ways. People walk into rooms, click on lights, switches, lights come on. Everything is great. In this country, we measure reliability in terms of minutes of outage over the course of a year. All of these things are leading us down a terrible, terrible path. And that is the path of complacency. Because the world that we're living in today, the world that they're rapidly accelerating into, will not withstand same old thinking of just do a little more of the same thing. And I came from the utility sector originally. I worked on rate cases. You know, you always think about these things in terms of, let's look in the rearview mirror. This is all the stuff we did in the past. We just want to make some more incremental additions to that. Maybe a little more capital, a little more operating funding as well. But the grid today, if we continue that backwards-looking approach, that failure of vision, the want of a roadmap for us collectively in this country to adopt, is going to lead us to a grid that is not reliable, that fails the levels of resiliency that are necessary, that becomes insecure in ways that put our national security and our health, safety, and comfort at great risk, and will not be affordable. You shouldn't have invited a downer about it. But it's not really a downer because I think there's a path forward on all these elements. So let's dig in a little bit, because the whole point of this is not for the folks that have been working 20 years on defining possibility through grid architecture. It's really about giving us something to think about and discuss together, to work collectively on, to figure out what the paths forward are. It's not going to be single, what the paths forward are. So let's start with the reliability. And I'll make a terrible confession. I was, and I continue to be part of the problem. Because when I worked at the utility, I worked on creating demand-side resources. I started at like $50 million a year budget. Incredible, I thought, up to $500 million a year in developing customer-sided demand-side resources. Whether it be energy efficiency, conservation, whether it be what we now call flexibility, but it was demand response back in that day. We spent a ton of money putting devices, programs, information, all kinds of stuff out there to create this vast potential at the grid edge. You heard Chris Irwin, who comes from my shop, and who I will scold when we get back. You heard Chris Irwin talking about and celebrating the vast potential of batteries on wheels located in people's garages. That potential is the problem we need to address. And I call it a problem because unless we find ways to tap into that potential, the potential on the grid edge, of devices, of people, of batteries on wheels, unless we find ways to tap into them in ways that are much more industrial than we're doing today, then we collectively are part of the problem. Because potential doesn't mean squat for the grid of the future. Because calling on resources once or twice a year and then celebrating that we kept the lights on under the worst possible conditions is the least common sense, least economic approach to using those resources. And a failure to translate the vision of tapping into those resources into a roadmap is going to be the bane of the 21st century electricity grid, not just in our country, but others as well. So as we think and have our conversations across today and tomorrow, I want to lay a few principles out there that I want you, I beg you, no, I demand that you think about along the way. First, we talked about reliability. We started off there. So that reliability, that enviable reliability, I would argue, is now something to be concerned about. Because if and to the extent you are in a system that is having increasing amounts of two kinds of resources. One, the thing that everyone always talks about, what happens if the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine. Inverter-based resources, creating new challenges, but also new opportunities for how we think about and manage the grid. That one, I think, is the easy part. The hard part is what you guys have to think about. And that is, how do we get to this stuff on the grid edge? From a utility perspective, and you note I'm wearing a clip-on tie, so there was a utility back in the quarter century. From a utility perspective, all those devices out there, all that vast potential, are a couple of things. Thing number one, invisible. Thing number two, uncontrollable. Thing number three, derated in how I think about planning for the grid. Because the culture that was of the last over 100 years is about, if I can push a button and make it turn on and off, I count. We, in this room, not just the wise folks who are part of the council, but all of us, representing all our perspectives, need to figure ways to harden the ability of a utility to count on those demand-side resources, those DERs, whatever an aggregator brings to the table, whatever a microgrid can deliver, those vehicles on wheels. We need to figure a way to create not just financial models, but an architecture, a vision, and a roadmap for being able to count on them in ways that we do with just the typical supply-side resources. That's the reliability of it. And as we think about that, there's another element to it. And this is going to be part of, I know, the 2 days of conversation. And that is, we have to think about how to influence those people who aren't at the table today. I know there's a speaker from Southern California, Edison, somewhere in the room who's going to be speaking today. But you don't have the whole of the utility landscape sitting in on this conversation about how to move forward, you do have the attention of the whole utility landscape about the fact that we don't know anything about how to control these resources. So the solutions created in this room have to be used to influence the utility sector and the economic regulators in ways that allow for muscular investment in changing both the operations and the resource planning decisions and reliability decisions of utilities around the country. That's how you animate tremendous amount of capital and effort to work on system reliability. Resilience, that's thing number 2. You must consider and talk about resilience as you look at the grid-wise architecture approach to taking vision to roadmap to action. And I'll tell you why. It's your ace in the hole. The fact of the matter is all of these resources that are somewhat dormant today can be part of a resiliency solution for a network, a series of network planners, operators, who are faced with greater challenges than ever before. In California, I remember when I was working in the utility, because I had the demand side resources, we worked on the biannual resource plan update, on the resource plans, on how we get a reliability margin in there, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And in those days, we write testimony and talk about wildfire season. There's no wildfire season anymore. The state is being challenged by wildfires today, and all through the Pacific Northwest, the challenge is constant. It's constant. You have a hurricane, God hope it's not going to be horrible, or a hurricane, yet another hurricane, challenging the Gulf Coast. We had people die because a polar vortex reached down into Texas, all those. Anybody who tries to deny the fact that both the magnitude, severity, obviously, and a number of natural events that are damaging and destroying the reliability of our system has his or her head in the sand. These resources that can be tapped, that can be reached, that can be animated, that can be counted on, have to be part of the resiliency solution. And the good part, most of the investment for them actually happens out of other people's money. Security. Now here's the part where I have to look at you kind of beady-eyed. So, because of my role, I get to do all the James Bond stuff where you go sit in a concrete bunker somewhere and we talk about national security, etc. But those very, very serious people who think about the security of the grid look at the grid edge, not for its vast potential, but for its potential as a threat. Now the reality is, it's true. The more big, the more complex, the more it reaches into all these devices that can be addressed by others, it does create a larger threat surface. So we have to ask ourselves, let me tell you something terrible about that. I live here in Southern California, so for those of you who are visiting, welcome, hello, pay your $5 California tax to me before you leave the room. But the thing we Californians like to do on Saturday morning is my wife and I go down to the beach, and in the summertime, you've got all these folks who come to save up their money to take their children to the beach, and they wade out into the ocean, and the waves come rolling in. And if you don't live here, you don't realize, waves don't just happen in this very uniform fashion like you painted in grade school. Every now and again, a big one comes in. And then you see these wonderful, wonderful people from Iowa who have a giant sunburn on their back, holding out their hands like this, trying to stop that next big wave from bowling them over and knocking them onto the shore. I don't even remember why I was telling this part of the story. But it has, well, it's because when you think about that, you can't wish away the inevitable. You can't wish away things that are happening today. The complexity of the grid edge happens whether we tap into it or not. What our job is to recognize that's part of the landscape of the grid today and find ways not to insulate, create concrete walls around to be able to guarantee that you would never, ever have a disruption caused by an outside force from the grid edge. But to be smart about understanding how to work and how to insulate to the extent possible, but how to build in resiliency when things do go wrong. And finally, let me suggest this last thing. When I first came to the department, Chris will tell you the silver drinks. In fact, make sure tonight you'll see Chris. Chris, I authorize you to use your own money to buy everyone. And do not put it under expensive organization. But all kidding aside, one of the things I brought in was something that was always tacitly understood in our department, looking at the grid and reliability and resilience, but not explicitly stated. And I think it must be explicitly stated. And I think it must be something that the work of GWAC does as we all move forward. And that's affordability. Affordability. And let me use the seats at this table to tell you why affordability is important. On this side of the room, you have someone who will stand up and say, affordability. Bills are too high as we speak. People barely afford to keep things together. We can't afford to spend money on this fancy science-based architecture to do this, that, and the other. Affordability means we must stay where we are and allow the rot to continue around us. In this room, in these conversations over the next 2 days, I beg you, I implore you, again, I demand that you recharacterize, you retake back the word affordability and put it in the proper perspective for thinking about the grid and its reliability, its resilience, and its security. And that is from an investment perspective. The whole reason there are utilities in this country that are getting franchises is it made no sense from an engineering or an economics perspective to just allow anybody and everybody to string their own wires around there. The whole reason that utilities exist is because they can plan from a central standpoint, but they can also do something that's even more powerful. And that's amass large amounts of capital to invest in creating a secure grid. Affordability has to be seen from not a how much money do I have in my wallet today perspective, but what's it going to cost the American people if we don't make investments that allow us to tap in to the batteries on it, that allow us to make more fulsome use to all of those distributed energy uses. And the only folks who can make that argument credibly, are fill in the blank in your head. I'll give you a second. Okay, stop, erase that, because it's the wrong answer. The only folks are all of us. It has to be a collective proposal for how to move forward. It has to be something that understands the perspectives, not just the very smart people who understand kind of how to create a vision or create a flow chart or create a nice, very readable work. Mark's going to talk to you later today, about how to move forward. But people who can say, we have gathered the perspectives of both the private and public sectors, those people who are doing the planning and implementing, and those people who are benefiting from it. We have pulled together a path forward that works for all of us on an investment basis, on a pathway to the future. Okay, that's great. I just made it sound way too simple, to be honest. Because the truth of the matter is, what's wrong with you people? Don't you recognize that you're in the United States of America? You've got 50 different states, each with their own resources, each with their own policies, each with their own idiosyncrasies. You've got 5 inhabited territories. You even got the District of Columbia, where my apartment is. How the heck do you folks think you're going to change things there? Well, I'll tell you how to do that. I think you have to recognize that part of the complexity that you're addressing is not just the architecture, it's how to translate that into those 50 states, 5 inhabited territories, and District of Columbia. And that creates an absolute need for the work that you're doing, for the discussions that you're having, to be, we call it optionality in our room, but actually it's just applicability. To make it acceptable, understandable, and applicable so it's adoptable in every state, no matter what they think about renewable energy, no matter what they think about climate change, no matter who they're going to vote for in November. Optionality is just recognizing and respecting that we don't get to make all the decisions so that we need multiple pathways forward that are understandable, accessible, and eventually adoptable in all the variants that we have across these 50 states, if we want to make a difference. We didn't come here not to make a difference. I'm trying to, here's another terrible thing about it. Wherever I go, I have this staff of people who write these really beautiful, beautiful prose here. Wonderful prose here. You're really missing out. I should leave this here so that you can read it. But it seems to me it's highly inappropriate for me to give you this kind of scanned speech that they give to people like me. But we'll all pretend that I did those. But I want to go to my last point, and that is this. And I do things in kind of a joking manner. It's just who I am, it's just how I do. But I want you to take away 2 things that are here. The 20 years of work that you have done means nothing. Means nothing if we can't get it put into action now. And I say now because as we sit here, the tremendous potential on the grid edge is growing at a pace that's amazing. But also the challenges and threats to investing in the same old way on long-term assets, on both culture and operational norms that will outlive all of us in this room. That kind of poor investment decision today is going to pay bad dividends into not just the near future, but hobble us for the future. So let's think about having these conversations, but in every one of the conversations, please think about reliability, brag about resilience aspects, tackle security, and underscore affordability. And with that, I know I used up my time. Well, then if you don't mind, keep going.
Keep going. How much material do you have?
That's Chris. Sometimes I call him over and say, I have a question for you, and then 45 minutes later I can see him finding it. But I can't underscore enough how important these conversations are. And more importantly, I can't underscore enough how we have to think of ourselves differently than we have before. I'm going to say something now, Chris will roll his eyes because it's something I say probably on a daily basis in our office to folks. Finding the right answers isn't the key here. Coming up with a set of tools doesn't matter. We have to have 2 things go to work, and I think that's applicable to GWAC as well. One is impact. And the impact is in the roadmap because it's something tangible you can pass on. But the other is something that I want you as a community, and that's not just the folks who are part of GWAC, it's everyone in this room and everyone we work with, to recognize. That second element is influence. We do not control the decisions in the 50 states, 5.5 territories, district. Just being right isn't enough. We need to be effective. And that means that the work of GWAC that is based in understanding the physics of the grid, a clear understanding of where we are, and an even better roadmap into where we need to get to, we need to be loud and influential in the world so that this work isn't just held in this room, but it's actually influenced all those people who are rummaging around, looking for the free shotguns and stuff. It's always bad to have a conference this time of year, because what that means is people stop and stuff are looking. Well, here's a pencil eraser that has the name of a solar. But all things aside, we need to be influential to them. We need to be influential to the policymakers, the regulators, and I will tell you something we work on all the time in our office, the legislators, because I will end here where I started. The scariest thing to me in Washington, D.C. is not the politics, is not the disruption. It's the lack of understanding about the engineering marvel it takes to keep the lights on in the country. The failure to recognize the need to think about investment and planning differently than we have over the last 100 years. And the fact that the folks on the Hill all are very, very, very earnest folks who, some are less serious than others, but that none of them want the lights to go off in this country. But precisely, so far in my discussions, 2.5 to 3, and 1 I'm still not sure about, really understand how difficult it is to think about what the future must be in this country. So the influence here has to be across the private sector, because if we do not influence the utilities, the consumers, the folks down on the shop floor here who are trying to sell more wares and services, then we will not be able to influence the regulators and the legislators to allow what needs to happen. So with that, I'm giving you the charge. This work, these conversations are more important than you can imagine. Your participation over the next 2 days as a representative of whatever perspective, whatever company, whatever set of beliefs you come from is absolutely critical, because none of this can happen. None of this can happen unless we can find a way to get people to align around one vision that turns into a set of roadmaps that can be applied everywhere in this country. And for that, I will thank you for the work that I know you're going to do over the next 2 days. And again, I remind you, I've given Chris the authority to use his own money, his own pocket, to buy each of you a drink to do it together. So thank you very much.